"Can you buy us, mister?" said the girl holding two babies at the auction. The sun beats down on a dusty frontier town square. A ragged girl, clutching two crying infants, stares up at a stranger. Around them, the crowd laughs, sneers, and bids like it's cattle being sold. One man reaches for his coin. But he doesn't yet know that saving these children will ignite a battle far greater than he ever imagined, because their mother waits in a jail cell, chained by false charges, because powerful men want her land, the only water for miles, and because what begins as one desperate plea will soon set fire to a town, a cabin, and a lonely man's broken heart. What secrets bind this family to the land? What will it cost the man who dared to step forward? And when bullets fly and justice is on trial, will mercy win, or will the frontier swallow them whole? Your reactions remind me why these stories matter. If you still believe in the quiet power of love, justice, and truth, then you're part of the reason I keep sharing them. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the Colorado Railtown Square, baking the packed dirt and raising shimmers of heat from the wooden planks of the auction platform. Owen adjusted his worn leather hat, trying to shield his eyes from the glare. He hadn't meant to stay in town longer than needed, just a quick trip for nails, flour, and lamp oil. But the crowd gathering in the square had blocked his path back to his horse. The creak of wagon wheels and murmur of townsfolk filled the air as people assembled around the auction block. Owen stood at the back, his tall frame allowing him to see over the heads of others. His weathered face remained impassive, though his fingers tightened on the sack of supplies he carried. "Next up!" The trader's voice cut through the humid afternoon air like a knife. "Got me some fine workers here, folks." Owen's breath caught in his throat. There on the wooden platform stood a girl, no more than 10 years old, her dress patched but clean, her spine straight despite the fear in her eyes. In her arms she carried 2 bundles, twin infant boys, their faces red from the heat and crying. "Family couldn't pay their debts," the trader announced, his voice oily with false sympathy. "Law's the law. Gotta settle up somehow." The girl's eyes swept the crowd, desperate and pleading. When her gaze met Owen's, something inside him cracked, a feeling he'd buried deep since his Sarah died, bringing their own child into the world. Both had been lost that day, leaving him alone with nothing but mountain wilderness for company. "Can you buy us, mister?" The girl's voice carried clearly across the square, directed straight at him. Several people turned to look, but Owen barely noticed them. That voice, so young, yet carrying such adult worry, pierced right through his carefully constructed walls. His first instinct was to turn away. He'd learned the hard way that caring for others only led to heartache. The mountains were safer. Solitude was safer. He took a step back. "Starting bid is $20 for the lot," the trader called out, "though we can separate them if anyone's interested in just 1 or 2. He reached for one of the babies. The girl clutched her brothers tighter, her face pale but determined. "Please," she whispered, though Owen could still hear her. "Don't split us up." Owen's feet moved before his mind caught up. He found himself pushing through the crowd, ignoring the mutters and sideways glances. His hand went to the money pouch at his belt, the coins he'd saved for winter supplies. "I'll settle their debt," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "All of it." The trader's eyebrows rose. "Whole debt's $48.60, friend. That's a lot of coin for damaged goods." Anger flared in Owen's chest at the trader's words. These were children, not goods. He counted out the money, aware of every eye in the square on him. The coins felt heavy as he placed them in the trader's eager palm. "You're a fool!" someone in the crowd called out. "3 mouths to feed instead of good sense." Owen ignored them all, focusing instead on the girl as she carefully made her way down the platform steps, her brothers held close. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her collarbones stuck out too sharply beneath her dress. "What's your name, girl?" he asked quietly. "Ivor," she replied, shifting one of the babies to a more comfortable position. "These are James and John. They're 6 months old." She looked up at him with eyes too old for her young face. "Are you really taking us home with you?" Home. Owen hadn't thought that far ahead. His cabin was sparse, barely fit for one person who spent most of his time in the mountains. But he couldn't leave these children here, couldn't bear to see them separated or worse. "For tonight," he said, though something in him knew it wouldn't be that simple. "We'll sort things out tomorrow. Church folks can help find you a proper family." Ava's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you for helping us." The crowd began to disperse, though Owen could hear the whispers and feel the stares. Fool, they called him. Soft-headed mountain man, more beard than brains. Let him waste his money. Owen led Ava toward the general store where his horse was hitched. The girl followed close behind, her steps quick to keep up with his longer stride. He slowed his pace, remembering suddenly how small she was. "Mr. Jenkins," he called to the store owner, "need to add to my order. Milk, if you've got it, some soft bread, and—" He glanced at Ava's thin frame. "Whatever food you've got that's ready to eat now." The store owner nodded, though his eyes widened at the sight of Owen's new companions. As he gathered the supplies, Owen heard him muttering, "Never thought I'd see the day." Owen helped Ava arrange the babies in a makeshift sling across his horse's flanks, using his bedroll to create a secure cradle. He lifted Ava onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. The town seemed to hold its breath as he turned his horse toward the mountain trail. "It's a fair piece to my cabin," he said gruffly. "You hold tight to the pommel there." "Yes, sir," Ava replied, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. One of the twins began to fuss, and she tensed. "They'll be all right," Owen assured her, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "Horses' movement usually settles babies right down." Sure enough, the steady rhythm of the horse's walk soon had both infants sleeping soundly in their improvised carrier. As they left the town behind, Owen felt the weight of the townsfolk's judgment falling away, replaced by a different kind of weight, responsibility for these 3 young lives. The sun was still high, making the trail ahead shimmer with heat. Owen kept the horse to a steady pace, mindful of his precious cargo. Every so often, he felt Ava lean back slightly against his chest, as if making sure he was still there. What had he done? The question echoed in his mind with each hoofbeat. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and in one moment of weakness, or perhaps strength, he'd torn them all down. 3 children. 3 lives depending on him now, at least for tonight. But when Ava turned her face up to him, a glimpse of trust showing through her wariness, Owen knew he couldn't have done anything else. Some choices, once made, couldn't be unmade. Some paths, once taken, had to be followed to their end. The mountain trail stretched before them, leading up toward his cabin and whatever tomorrow might bring. Behind them, the town grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a collection of shadows in the summer haze. The wagon wheels creaked beneath them as Owen guided his team up the mountain trail. He had borrowed the wagon from Jenkins at the general store, knowing his horse alone couldn't carry them all safely home. The summer sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ava sat beside him on the wooden seat, the twins nestled in a nest of blankets at her feet. None of the children had spoken since leaving town. The only sounds were the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the occasional soft whimper from one of the babies. Owen stole glances at the girl when he could. Her face remained stoic, but exhaustion showed in the slump of her shoulders and the way her head occasionally nodded before she caught herself. The twins had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep, their tiny faces peaceful for the first time since he'd seen them on the auction block. The trail grew steeper, winding through stands of pine and aspen. Owen's cabin lay tucked away in a small valley, far from the nearest neighbor. He'd chosen the spot for its solitude after Sarah died, wanting nothing more than to escape the pitying looks and well-meaning consolations of townfolk. Now, watching Ava's careful attention to her brothers, he wondered if he'd done right by bringing children to such an isolated place. Stars were beginning to pepper the darkening sky when they finally reached the cabin. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop near the door, the horse's breath steaming in the cooling mountain air. "This is it," he said softly, not wanting to startle the babies. "Let me get a lamp lit before we move them." Ava nodded, her eyes taking in the rough-hewn logs of the cabin walls, the smoke curling from the stone chimney. Owen had left the fire banked that morning, and he said a silent prayer of thanks for that foresight. Inside, he struck a match to the oil lamp that hung from a beam. The warm light spilled over the simple furnishings. A table he'd built himself from pine boards, 2 chairs, a few shelves holding books and supplies. His bedroll lay near the hearth, where the embers still glowed faintly red. He helped Ava carry the twins inside, laying them gently on his bedroll while he stoked the fire back to life. The girl stood in the middle of the room, looking smaller than ever in the lamplight, her arms wrapped around herself as if for comfort. "Hungry?" Owen asked, moving to the cupboard where he kept his supplies. "Got beans and cornbread from this morning?" "Yes, sir," Ava whispered, her first words since they'd left town. "Thank you." While the beans warmed in a pot over the fire, Owen went out to tend to his cow. He returned with a bucket of fresh milk, which he carefully warmed. Ava showed him how to feed the twins, demonstrating with practiced hands how to dribble the milk into their eager mouths using a clean cloth as a wick. The babies settled again after eating, and Ava finally sat at the table to eat her own meal. Owen watched as she took small, careful bites of the cornbread, as if afraid it might be taken away. "There's plenty more," he assured her, pushing the plate closer. "Eat your fill." She glanced up at him, then took a larger bite. The beans and cornbread disappeared quickly after that, though she kept watching the twins between mouthfuls. Owen pulled extra quilts from his storage chest, laying them out near the hearth. The summer night would be cool at this elevation, and the children would need the warmth. "My name's Ava," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I should have said before. Thank you for helping us, sir." Owen nodded, unsure how to respond to the gratitude in her voice. "Owen?" he offered. "Just Owen is fine." He busied himself banking the fire for the night, aware of Ava's eyes following his movements. When he turned back, she had drawn closer to the twins, one small hand resting protectively on each of their backs. "Will you—" she started, then paused, gathering courage. "Will you take us to the church board tomorrow?" Owen nodded slowly. It was the sensible thing to do. The church ladies would know how to care for children, would find them a proper home with a family. Ava's fingers tightened in the quilts. "Our mother," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She's alive. She's in the jail in town. They said she stole things, but she didn't. She wouldn't." Owen felt his chest tighten at the pain in her voice. "Your mother?" "Ayana," Ava said. "She's Navajo. Papa was white. He worked for the railroad before he got sick. After he died, the trader said we owed money, but Mama said we didn't. Then they took her away." Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. She wouldn't steal. She wouldn't. Owen sank down onto one of the chairs, his mind working through this new information. A Navajo woman? Wrongly imprisoned? The trader's smug face at the auction took on a darker meaning. The fire popped and settled, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Ava had curled up beside her brothers, but her eyes remained fixed on Owen, waiting. He stared into the flames, feeling the weight of the day's choices pressing down on him. The sensible thing would be to take them to the church board, let others sort out the truth of their mother's imprisonment. He'd done more than enough already, hadn't he? But as he watched Ava finally drift into exhausted sleep, her arms still protective around her brothers, Owen knew sleep would not come easily to him tonight. The quiet life he'd built in these mountains had been shattered by 3 small lives and a story of injustice that tugged at his conscience like a persistent wind. The sun had barely crested the eastern peaks when Owen hitched the horses to his borrowed wagon. Morning dew dampened his boots as he helped Ava load her still-sleeping brothers into their nest of blankets. The girl's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she refused to rest, keeping watch over the twins with fierce devotion. The journey down the mountain took less time than their ascent the previous evening. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and sage as they wound their way back toward town. Owen's mind churned with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. What had seemed like a simple act of mercy now felt like stepping into quicksand. The town was just stirring to life when they arrived, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks and ranch hands heading to the saloon for breakfast. Owen guided the wagon toward the white clapboard church that stood at the edge of town, its weathered cross reaching toward the morning sky. Preacher Josiah was already outside, tending to his small garden of vegetables when they pulled up. The older man straightened slowly, brushing dirt from his hands as he watched them approach. His lined face creased with concern when he recognized Owen and the children. "Brother Owen," he said carefully, his eyes moving from the mountain man to Ava and the twins. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town 2 days running." Owen helped Ava down from the wagon before speaking. "Need to talk with you, preacher. About these children's mother." The preacher's shoulders tensed slightly. He glanced around the empty street before gesturing toward the church door. "Best come inside." The church interior was cool and dim, morning light filtering through simple glass windows. Wooden pews lined the central aisle, leading to a modest pulpit. Ava settled in a front pew with her brothers, while Owen followed Josiah to his small office. "You've stepped in something complicated, Owen," Josiah said once the door was closed. He lowered himself into his desk chair with a weary sigh. "That woman in the jail, Ayana, she's not guilty of what they claim." "And what do they claim?" "Theft from the mercantile. But it's a lie, plain and simple." The preacher's voice dropped lower. "It's about the water rights. Her land sits on Crow Creek, only reliable water source between here and the pass. Railroad Syndicate wants it for their cattle operations, and the local ranchers are backing them." Owen leaned against the wall, pieces falling into place. "The trader at the auction, he's involved?" Josiah nodded. "Works for Randall Pike. He's the syndicate boss. They've been trying to pressure Ayana to sell since her husband passed. When she wouldn't..." He spread his hands helplessly. "They manufactured charges, got her locked up. Figure if she's declared unfit, the children become wards of the county, then the land can be sold off for their care." "That's theft," Owen said, his voice rough with anger. "It's business, according to Pike and his bunch." Josiah ran a hand over his face. "Look, Owen, you seem like you mean well, but my advice? Take those children to the church board. Let them handle this official-like. Pike's crowd, they play rough with folks who get in their way." A soft sound made them both turn. Ava stood in the doorway, her small face set in determined lines. "My mama never stole anything," she said firmly. "She taught us stealing was wrong. She wouldn't." Owen looked at the girl, seeing again that mix of fear and fierce courage that had moved him at the auction. She crossed the room to grip his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Please," she whispered, "please help us." Josiah cleared his throat. "Owen, think carefully. You've lived peaceful up in those mountains since Sarah. Do you really want to invite this kind of trouble?" The mention of his wife's name sent a familiar ache through Owen's chest. He'd chosen solitude after her death, wrapped himself in it like a blanket. But looking down at Ava's pleading face, he felt that blanket beginning to unravel. "Where's the jail?" he asked finally. "Owen." Josiah's warning tone was clear. "Where?" The preacher sighed. "End of Main Street. But don't say I didn't warn you." Owen nodded his thanks, then led Ava back to her brothers. The town was fully awake now, and faces turned to watch as they made their way down the boardwalk. He could hear the whispers, see the pointing fingers. The mountain man who'd caused such a scene at yesterday's auction was back, still trailing those Indian children. The jail was a squat building of red brick, its barred windows staring out like hollow eyes. Owen lifted the twins from the wagon, cradling one while Ava carried the other. Their small procession drew more stares as they approached the jail's eastern wall, where a ground-level window opened into one of the cells. A woman's face appeared at the bars, high cheekbones, dark eyes that held both warmth and wariness. Her long black hair was neatly braided, and though her clothes were worn, they were clean and carefully mended. She carried herself with quiet dignity, even behind iron bars. "Mama!" Ava's cry was soft but fierce. She pressed close to the window, shifting her brother so Ayana could see him clearly. "My children," Ayana breathed, reaching one hand through the bars to touch Ava's cheek. Her eyes moved to Owen, studying him with careful assessment. "You are the one who helped them?" Owen nodded, suddenly uncomfortable under that steady gaze. "Name's Owen. Your girl here says you've been falsely accused." "Yes." The simple word carried weight, backed by unwavering eyes. "They wish to take my land my husband left for our children. The creek waters it carries are sacred to my people and precious to all who live here. I would not steal from the trader. I would not bring such shame to my children or my ancestors." The quiet strength in her voice rang with truth. Owen found himself believing her completely, though it meant stepping into exactly the kind of trouble he'd spent years avoiding. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Owen sat on the wooden bench outside the jailhouse. Ava perched beside him, one twin in her arms while Owen held the other. The marshal's boots thumped heavily on the boardwalk as he approached, casting a long shadow over them. "This won't do, Owen," Marshal Harlan said, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. "Those children need to be turned over to proper authorities. County's got procedures for situations like this." Owen shifted the sleeping infant in his arms. "Seems to me they're doing fine where they are. You've got no legal right to them." The marshal's voice hardened. "Their mother's case is still pending. Until that's settled, they're wards of the territory." "No!" Ava's cry startled her brother awake. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she grabbed Owen's arm. "Please don't let them take us." The marshal's hand moved to rest on his holster. "Don't make this difficult, Owen. You're already neck-deep in trouble buying those kids at that auction. That wasn't legal, and you know it." "Neither was selling them," Owen replied quietly. A commotion from down the street drew their attention. Preacher Josiah was hurrying toward them, his black coat flapping. His face was flushed from the heat and exertion. "Hold on there, Marshal," the preacher called out, slightly winded. "There's precedent here we need to consider." The marshal's jaw tightened. "This isn't church business, preacher, but it is a matter of law and conscience." Josiah pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his brow. "By territorial statute, any person who rescues abandoned or endangered children may petition for temporary guardianship until a proper hearing can be held." "These children weren't abandoned," the marshal argued. "No?" Josiah's eyebrows rose. "Then why were they being sold at auction? Either they were abandoned, in which case Owen has the right to shelter them, or they were being trafficked illegally, in which case we have a much more serious crime to investigate." The marshal's face darkened, but Owen could see the man weighing his options. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, he can keep them until the hearing, but this isn't over." He fixed Owen with a hard stare. "You're making a mistake, getting mixed up in this business." They watched the marshal stalk away, his spurs jingling with each angry step. Ava's grip on Owen's arm slowly relaxed, though her eyes remained wary. "Thank you, preacher," Owen said quietly. Josiah nodded. "You'll need supplies for those little ones. Best get to the store before it closes." The general store was cool and dim after the bright afternoon sun. Owen could feel the stairs as he followed Ava down the narrow aisles. The whispers weren't quite quiet enough to miss. "That's him, the mountain man who bought them Indian children." "Fool's errand, if you ask me. Man can't even take care of himself proper, living wild up there. Heard his wife died years back. No children of their own. Maybe he's gone touched in the head from being alone so long." Owen kept his eyes on the shelves, letting Ava select what they needed. Milk, flour, sugar, some simple toys for the twins. His jaw clenched at the next whispered comment. Sarah would be turning in her grave, seeing him take up with Indian children. The storekeeper's wife clucked her tongue as she wrapped their purchases. "You sure you know what you're doing, Owen? Babies need an awful lot of care. And that girl, she's half wild already." Ava's small shoulders stiffened, but she said nothing as she helped gather their bundles. Owen paid in silence, guiding the children back to the wagon. The afternoon was fading into evening as they started the long climb back to the cabin. The twins slept peacefully under quilts in the wagon bed, while Ava sat beside Owen on the driver's seat. The familiar trail seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, each turn revealing another switchback to navigate. Owen's thoughts churned like the wagon wheels. He'd lived alone since Sarah died, finding peace in the simplicity of his mountain existence. Now he'd stumbled into something that threatened to upend everything. The marshal's warning echoed in his mind, along with the townspeople's whispers. The cabin appeared just as dusk was settling in, its rough-hewn logs glowing golden in the last light. Owen carried the sleeping twins inside, while Ava followed with their packages. She moved around the cabin with careful steps, putting things away as if afraid to make too much noise. "I can cook," she said suddenly, her voice small in the gathering darkness. "And clean, too. Mama taught me how." She twisted her hands in her skirt. "I won't be any trouble, I promise." Owen lit the lamp, watching its flame cast dancing shadows on the walls. He sat heavily at the table, feeling the weight of the day settle onto his shoulders. Ava stood watching him, her face a mixture of hope and fear. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, already changed by the presence of these 3 children. Owen knew he should say something to reassure the girl, but words had never come easily to him. Instead, he simply nodded, gesturing for her to sit while he went to fix their supper. Outside, a coyote called into the deepening night. Owen stirred the beans slowly, aware that he had stepped into something far bigger than a simple act of mercy. The marshal's threats, the townspeople's judgment, the preacher's warning, all of it swirled together with the memory of Ayana's quiet dignity behind those jail bars. The beans bubbled softly on the stove while Ava set the table, her movements careful and precise. The twins slept on, unaware of the storm gathering around their small family. The mountain sunrise painted golden streaks across Owen's cabin floor, sneaking through gaps in the rough-hewn logs. He woke to unfamiliar sounds, the quiet clinking of tin dishes and the soft bubbling of beans cooking over the hearth fire. For a moment he lay still on his bedroll, wondering if he was dreaming. But then came a sound he hadn't heard in his home for years. Laughter. The twins were awake, their happy gurgles mixing with Ava's gentle whispers as she tended to them. Owen sat up slowly, taking in the scene before him. Ava had spread one of his old quilts near the hearth, where the twins rolled and crawled in the morning light. Their dark eyes sparkled as they reached for each other, tiny fingers grasping at the colorful patches. The girl moved between the cooking pot and washing basin with quiet efficiency, her movements careful and practiced despite her young age. "Good morning, Mr. Owen," she said softly, stirring the beans. "I hope it's all right I started breakfast. Mama always said to have food ready when the sun comes up." Owen cleared his throat. That's just fine." He stood, reaching for his boots. "Been a while since anyone cooked in this kitchen but me." The cabin felt different this morning, warmer somehow, despite the early mountain chill. The twins' laughter seemed to chase away the shadows that had lingered in the corners for so long. Even the old furniture appeared less worn, as if awakening from a long sleep. "Reckon we ought to fetch some water," Owen said, pulling on his coat. "Creek's running high with the spring melt." Ava nodded eagerly. "I can help. Mama showed me how to carry buckets without spilling." Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean. Owen led Ava down the narrow path to the creek, showing her how to test the ground for mud before stepping. The water rushed past, cold and clear from the mountain peaks. "See here," Owen demonstrated. "You want to dip the bucket upstream, where the water runs fastest." He helped her balance the wooden bucket, his large hands steady beside her small ones. "That's where it's cleanest." Ava proved to be a quick learner, soon managing the smaller bucket on her own. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the creek's song and occasional guidance from Owen. On their third trip back, he noticed her watching him carefully. "You're different from the other men in town," she said finally. "They look at us mean, but you don't." Owen paused, considering his words. "Reckon people fear what they don't understand. Ain't right, but that's how some folks are." The morning passed in steady work. Owen showed Ava where he kept the axe and taught her to stack kindling while he split larger logs. The familiar rhythm of chopping wood felt different with an audience, the twins now watching from their quilt in the shade, Ava sorting the smaller pieces with serious concentration. As evening approached, Ava served up beans and cornbread, her face proud as Owen cleaned his plate. The twins were already asleep in a makeshift cradle Owen had fashioned from an old crate, lined soft with blankets. "Can I ask you something?" Ava's voice was hesitant in the lamplight. When Owen nodded, she continued. "The lady in town mentioned someone named Sarah. Was she your wife?" Owen's hand stilled on the tin plate he was drying. For a long moment, only the crackling fire filled the silence. "Yes," he said finally. "She was my wife. Died 8 years back, during a hard winter." He swallowed hard. Never had a chance to be a mother. Ava absorbed this quietly, her small fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. "My papa died 2 winters ago," she offered softly. "He worked for the railroad, laying tracks. Got the fever real bad one night. Mama tried everything, but—" She blinked rapidly. "After that, it was just Mama taking care of us. She worked so hard, but the railroad men kept saying we owed them money." Owen watched as she wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. The grief in her young face was too familiar, too much like what he saw in his own mirror some mornings. Later, as the fire burned low, Ava knelt beside the makeshift cradle. Her whispered prayer filled the quiet cabin. "Great Spirit, watch over my brothers while they sleep. Keep Mama safe in that jail and—" She hesitated, glancing at Owen. "Thank you for sending us someone kind." Owen, unused to such open devotion, found himself bowing his head. The simple faith in her words stirred something long dormant in his heart. For the first time in years, peace settled over his home like a warm blanket. But the peace was short-lived. Just as Owen was banking the fire for the night, hoofbeats approached through the darkness. Ava's head snapped up, fear replacing the earlier contentment in her eyes. The rider's arrival was announced by the crunch of boots on gravel and the creak of saddle leather. Owen moved to the door, gesturing for Ava to stay back. Through the gathering dusk, he could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, one hand extended with what appeared to be a folded paper. The twins slept on, unaware, but the cabin's brief moment of joy seemed to draw back like a tide, leaving only uncertainty in its wake. Owen's hand rested on the door latch, his earlier peace replaced by a familiar tension as he prepared to face whatever new trouble had followed them up the mountain. The rider's approach broke the evening quiet. Marshal Harlan's badge caught the last rays of sunlight as he dismounted, his expression grim beneath the brim of his hat. Owen stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the wooden frame while Ava peered around his legs. "Evening, Owen," the marshal said, his voice carrying the weight of official business. He pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Got something here needs your attention." Owen stepped onto the porch, keeping himself between the marshal and the cabin door. "Mighty late for social calls, Marshal." "This ain't social." Marshal Harlan thrust the paper forward. "Court order declaring them children wards of the county. You're to deliver them to the orphanage by week's end." Inside, one of the twins whimpered. Ava darted back to comfort her brothers, her soft whispers carrying through the open door. Owen unfolded the warrant, though the fading light made the words hard to read. "These children got a mother," Owen said, his voice low and steady. "She's sitting in your jail on false charges." The marshal's face hardened. "That ain't for you to decide. Law's the law. You turn them over by Sunday, or there'll be fines. Might even be jail time for interfering with county business. He adjusted his gun belt meaningfully. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Owen's jaw tightened as he looked down at the paper. The legal language twisted like snakes on the page, but the meaning was clear enough. They aimed to take the children, one way or another. And if I refuse? Then I'll come back with deputies. The marshal mounted his horse, dust rising around the animal's hooves. Don't be a fool, Owen. You've lived peaceful up here a long time. Don't ruin that over some Indian woman's half-breeds. Owen's hands clenched into fists, but he held his tongue. The marshal wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving only swirling dust and the sound of Ava's muffled sobs from inside. The cabin felt smaller that night. Owen paced the wooden floors, the warrant crumpled on the table. Ava sat in the corner, holding her sleeping brothers close, her young face lined with worry beyond her years. We could hide in the woods, she whispered as the moon rose. I know how to keep quiet. The twins won't cry much if I... No. Owen cut her off, gentler than he meant to. Mountains ain't safe for little ones at night. Bears, mountain lions. We'll find another way. He barely slept, watching the embers die in the hearth while his mind churned. When the first grey light of dawn touched the windows, he had made his decision. Get your shawl, he told Ava as he saddled his horse. We're riding down to see Preacher Josiah. The morning air was crisp as they descended the mountain trail, Ava sitting before Owen in the saddle, the twins secured safely in a sling across her chest. The town was just stirring when they reached the church, where Preacher Josiah was already sweeping the steps. The preacher's eyes went wide at the sight of them. Inside, quick now, he urged, glancing up and down the street. Syndicate men been watching my place since yesterday. In the church's dim interior, Owen spread the warrant on a pew while Ava settled the twins on a blanket. Josiah read the document, his weathered face growing darker with each line. It's worse than I feared, the preacher said finally. Pike's syndicate, they've been planning this for months. Forged documents claiming Ayana's creek rights were never properly filed. He ran a hand through his grey hair. The only proof that could save her is buried in the county records office, 3 days' ride from here. What kind of proof? Owen demanded. Her late husband's original deed and water claim. The syndicate's papers are dated wrong. They show Pike owning the water rights before the railroad even laid track through here. Josiah shook his head. But without those records, it's their word against a widow's. Owen watched Ava playing quietly with her brothers, showing them a wooden cross from the altar. Something tight and familiar squeezed his chest. The same feeling he'd had watching Sarah slip away that winter night, helpless to save her. I won't let them take these children, he said quietly. Josiah touched his arm. Owen, think careful now. Standing against Pike means standing against the law itself. He's got the marshal, the judge, half the territory in his pocket. Then maybe it's time somebody stood up to him. Owen's voice was firm. My wife died because I couldn't save her. I won't fail another family. The preacher studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll help how I can. But be careful. Pike's men won't hesitate to use force. When they returned to the cabin that evening, Owen lifted Ava down from the saddle. She looked up at him, her dark eyes serious in the fading light. Are they really going to take us away? Owen knelt before her, his big hands gentle on her shoulders. Listen close now. I swear on my wife's memory I won't let anyone separate you from your mama. Whatever comes, we face it together. Ava threw her arms around his neck, and Owen held her close, feeling the twins stir in their sling between them. The setting sun painted the cabin in shades of gold and shadow, but for the first time since receiving the warrant, Owen felt the steel of certainty in his spine. He would protect this family, even if it meant standing against every law in the territory. Some promises, he realized, ran deeper than any paper warrant could reach. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks as Owen saddled his horse. Ava stood beside him, wrapped in a faded brown shawl that covered her dark hair. The twins slept peacefully inside the cabin, watched over by the preacher's wife who had arrived before first light. "Remember what I told you?" Owen said softly, helping Ava onto the horse. "Keep that shawl up and your head down when we get near town." The girl nodded, clutching the rough wool closer. "Yes, sir." They rode in silence down the winding trail, the morning mist curling around the horses' hooves. Owen's mind churned with worry. The risk of taking Ava into town was great, but he couldn't deny her the chance to see her mother. The streets were quiet when they reached the edge of town, most folks still at their morning chores. Owen guided his horse through back alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfare. At the jailhouse, he helped Ava dismount, keeping her close as they approached the heavy wooden door. The deputy looked up from his coffee, eyes narrowing. "What's your business, Owen?" "Come to see the prisoner. Brought someone who has a right to visit." Owen kept his voice steady, though his heart pounded. The deputy frowned, but reached for his keys. 10 minutes, that's all." The cell was small and dark, lit only by a barred window. Ayana sat on a narrow cot, her black hair falling loose around her shoulders. When she saw Ava, her face transformed with joy. "Shiaji!" Ayana opened her arms as Ava rushed forward. "My little one!" Mother and daughter clung to each other through the iron bars, speaking rapid Navajo between tears and laughter. Owen stood back, his throat tight as he watched their reunion. After a moment, Ayana looked up at him, her dark eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for bringing her, for protecting my children." Owen shifted uncomfortably. "Ain't right, what they're doing to you." Ayana stroked Ava's hair, her movements gentle despite the chains on her wrists. "My husband, John, he understood the value of our creek. Clean water, flowing all year. It's life itself in these mountains." Her voice grew stronger. "On his deathbed, he made me promise to keep it safe for our children. It was his last wish." Ava pressed closer to her mother. "The marshal gave Mr. Owen a paper. Says we got to go to the orphanage." Pain flashed across Ayana's face, but her voice remained steady. "Listen to me, Owen. These men, this syndicate, they think because I am a woman, because I am Navajo, they can take what is rightfully ours." She met his gaze directly. "I ask you not just to watch over my children, but to help us fight for the truth. My husband's papers prove our claim. Without them, my babies will lose everything." Owen felt the weight of her words settle into his bones. Before he could respond, the deputy's boots echoed in the corridor. "Time's up," he called gruffly. Ayana quickly pressed her forehead to Ava's. "Be strong, Shiaji. Remember your prayers. I love you." "I love you, Shima," Ava whispered, tears streaming down her face. The ride back to the cabin was silent, Ava's small shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. When they arrived, she ran straight to the twins, gathering them in her arms as the preacher's wife quietly took her leave. That evening, Owen sat at his rough-hewn table, watching as Ava fed her brothers their supper. Her voice was soft but determined as she told them every detail of their mother's words. "Shima says we must be brave," she murmured, wiping milk from the youngest twin's chin. "She says the creek is our future, just like Papa wanted." She pulled both babies close, her small frame protective around them. "She's going to come home to us, you'll see." Owen's chest ached as he watched them. The girl's faith in her mother, Ayana's quiet strength, the twins' innocent trust. It all twisted something loose inside him, something he'd kept locked away since Sarah's death. He couldn't stay neutral anymore, couldn't hide in his mountain solitude while this family was torn apart. As the fire died low in the hearth, Owen found himself kneeling beside his bed for the first time since he'd buried his wife. The floorboards were hard against his knees, the silence heavy around him. "Lord," he whispered roughly, "I ain't been much for praying these past years. Reckon I've been angry, carrying my grief like a shield." He paused, struggling for words. "But these children, their mama, they need more than just my anger. They need your strength, your wisdom. Help me fight this battle right." Outside in the deepening darkness, unknown to Owen, a shadow moved among the trees. The hired gun watched the cabin's dimming lights, mentally noting every detail. Pike's syndicate paid well for information, and this evening's activities would be of particular interest to the boss. The watcher waited until the last candle was extinguished, before slipping away into the night, leaving only disturbed pine needles as evidence of his vigil. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cabin's porch as Owen's wagon approached. Beside him, Ayana sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the small dwelling ahead. After 5 days of working with Preacher Josiah and the sympathetic Clark, they had finally secured her temporary release pending the delayed trial. "Shema! Shema!" Ava's cry split the air as she burst through the cabin door. The girl flew down the path, her dark braid streaming behind her. Owen barely had time to stop the wagon before Ayana was climbing down, catching her daughter in an embrace that brought tears to his eyes. The twins, hearing their sister's shouts, crawled to the doorway, babbling excitedly. "My little ones," Ayana whispered, gathering all 3 children close. Her calm dignity melted into pure joy as she pressed kisses to their faces. "How I've missed you." Owen busied himself with the horses, giving the family space for their reunion. The sound of their mingled laughter and Navajo endearments filled the yard, making his throat tight with memories of his own lost dreams of family. Inside the cabin, Ava proudly showed her mother how she'd kept house. The rough-hewn table was swept clean, tin plates stacked neatly on the shelf. A pot of beans simmered on the cook stove, and fresh cornbread filled the air with its homey scent. "I've been taking good care of everyone, Shima," Ava declared, straightening her shoulders. "Just like you taught me." Ayana stroked her daughter's hair. "You have done well, my brave one." She turned to Owen, who stood awkwardly by the door. "And you, Mr. Owen. There are no words enough to thank you." "Ain't nothing," he muttered, but warmth spread through his chest at her words. The evening settled into a gentle rhythm as they prepared supper together. Ayana moved through the small space with natural grace, helping Ava serve the beans while Owen poured coffee for the adults. The twins sat in their mother's lap, taking turns being fed spoonfuls of mashed beans and cornbread. Owen watched them from his place at the table's end. The cabin hadn't felt this alive since Sarah passed. The walls seemed to glow with more than just lamplight, filled with the sounds of family, spoons clinking, children chattering, soft laughter. For a moment, he could almost imagine this wasn't temporary. "The clerk says I must return when summoned for the trial," Ayana said after the children were settled on their pallets near the hearth. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I will not run. That would only prove their lies about me." Owen nodded, respecting her determination. "Preacher thinks we got a good chance, with them papers he found." "My husband believed in the law, even when it failed our people." Ayana's eyes reflected the firelight. "I must believe too, for my children's sake." The twins had drifted off to sleep, but Ava still sat close to her mother, unwilling to let go. Ayana hummed softly, an old Navajo melody that made Owen's chest ache with its beauty and sadness. When the children were finally sleeping, Owen stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool and clean, filled with the whisper of pine needles. Above, stars scattered across the dark sky like drops of silver. He drew a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. Joy filled him at having helped bring this family together, at seeing Ava's happiness and the twins' delight. Yet fear gnawed at his gut. The syndicate wouldn't take this lying down. Their temporary peace felt as fragile as morning frost. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to find Ayana in the doorway. "You are troubled," she said simply. Owen ran a hand through his greying hair. "Just thinking how quiet it used to be here. Lonely quiet, not peaceful quiet." He paused. "Your being here, with the little ones, it's right somehow. Makes the place feel like home again." Ayana's smile was gentle in the starlight. "Perhaps the Creator knows what our hearts need, even when we do not." She touched his arm briefly. "Thank you, Owen, for giving my children shelter. for believing in justice. He watched her return inside to her sleeping children, his heart full of emotions he couldn't name. The cabin glowed behind him like a beacon in the darkness, warm with the promise of family and healing. High on the ridge above the cabin, unseen in the darkness, a figure on horseback raised his arm. The signal was answered by 2 distant flashes of light from other watchers in the hills. The hired gun turned his horse toward town, where Pike and his syndicate waited for news. By dawn, their plan would be in motion. But for now, in the peaceful cabin below, a fragile family slept, watched over by a man who had rediscovered his capacity for love and courage. Through the cabin's window, the lamplight slowly dimmed, leaving only starlight to guard their dreams. 2 nights after Ayana's release, the sunset painted the mountain sky in ominous shades of crimson. Owen stood on his cabin's porch, unease prickling at the back of his neck. The evening was too quiet, missing the usual chorus of night birds and insects. His dogs, usually content to doze by the woodpile, began barking furiously at the deepening shadows. Their hackles rose as they faced the tree line, growling at something hidden in the gathering darkness. Inside the cabin, Ayana looked up from where she was tucking the twins into their bedroll. "Something troubles the dogs," she said softly, her dark eyes meeting Owen's. Ava sat cross-legged by the hearth, mending a sock by lamplight. The domestic peace of the scene made Owen's heart clench. He'd grown too comfortable with their presence, let his guard down. "Stay inside," he muttered, reaching for his rifle. Through the window he caught glimpses of movement along the tree line, dark shapes slipping between the pines. The first fire arrow struck the roof with a whoosh and a shower of sparks. Owen's shout of warning was drowned by the crack of gunfire. Bullets splintered the door frame as he dove inside. "Out the back!" he yelled to Ayana, who was already gathering the twins. "Through the vegetable patch! Stay low!" Ava scrambled to her feet, eyes wide with terror. More arrows thudded into the roof, and the crackle of flames grew louder overhead. Smoke began seeping through the ceiling boards. Owen fired 2 shots through the window, forcing the attackers to scatter. "Go!" he urged, as Ayana ushered the children toward the back door. The cabin was filling with smoke now, making the twins cough and cry. They burst out the back door into the chill night air. Gunfire followed them, bullets kicking up dirt at their feet. Owen pushed them toward the dense undergrowth beyond the vegetable patch, providing covering fire with his rifle. One of the twins, little Joseph, stumbled and fell. The smoke was too much for his tiny lungs. His breathing came in desperate gasps as Ayana tried to lift him. "I've got him!" Owen growled, scooping up the boy with one arm while still gripping his rifle. Joseph's small body shuddered against his chest, fighting for air in the thickening smoke. They crashed through the brush, thorns tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the cabin was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky. The heat pressed against their backs as they fled deeper into the forest. Ayana led them up a narrow deer trail, carrying the other twin while Ava clutched her mother's skirts. Owen followed, still cradling Joseph, who had finally started breathing easier in the clean mountain air. Shots rang out sporadically, but the darkness and rough terrain worked in their favor. For hours they climbed, using the stars for guidance. The glow of the burning cabin faded behind them, though its loss weighed heavy on Owen's heart. That cabin had been his sanctuary for 15 years, built with his own hands after Sarah died. Now it was ashes, like so many other dreams. Near dawn they found shelter in a deep canyon hollow, screened by thick juniper bushes. Owen settled Joseph beside his brother while Ayana checked both twins for injury. Ava huddled close to her mother, shivering in the pre-dawn chill. "We must return to town," Ayana said finally, her voice steady despite their ordeal. "I will not let them make us fugitives. The truth must come out." Owen shook his head, checking his remaining ammunition. "Pike's syndicate controls the town now. They'll have men watching every road, waiting to finish what they started tonight." "Then what hope do we have?" Ava whispered, her small face streaked with soot and tears. The eastern sky began to lighten, revealing their desperate situation. They had no food, no blankets, and only the clothes on their backs. The twins curled together for warmth, while Ava pressed close to her mother's side. Owen sat with his back against the canyon wall, rifle across his knees. The morning air bit cold through his smoke-stained shirt. He watched Ayana comfort her children, her quiet strength undiminished by their circumstances. The sun crept higher, illuminating the destruction they'd fled. Somewhere below, the remains of Owen's cabin smoldered, 15 years of solitude reduced to ashes in a single night. But as he watched Ayana whisper prayers over her sleeping children, he knew he'd make the same choice again. They spent that long morning huddled in their rocky shelter, jumping at every snapped twig or rustle of leaves. The twins dozed fitfully while Ava kept watch with wide, frightened eyes. None of them spoke above a whisper, fear of discovery still fresh. By midday, hunger gnawed at their bellies. The children were used to regular meals now, and their discomfort showed in quiet whimpers and tears. Ayana gathered what wild berries she could find near their hiding place, but it wasn't nearly enough. As afternoon faded toward evening, the temperature began to drop. Owen stripped off his coat to wrap around the twins, while Ava and Ayana huddled together for warmth. The canyon walls cast long shadows across their hollow as another night approached. "We can't stay here," Owen said finally, watching the children shiver. "They need proper shelter, food." Ayana nodded, her face drawn with worry for her little ones. "But where can we go? The syndicate will be watching every town, every trail." Before Owen could answer, a twig snapped in the brush above their hollow. Everyone froze, hearts pounding. Owen raised his rifle, aiming at the source of the sound. The children hardly dared to breathe, as footsteps crunched closer through the fallen leaves. The pale light of dawn crept over the canyon walls as Owen carefully picked his way down a rocky slope. His boots crunched softly on loose stones while he searched for signs of water. The children needed more than just berries, and their thirst had grown urgent through the night. A trickle of water caught his ear, perhaps a spring feeding into the canyon bottom. He worked his way toward the sound, keeping close to the cliff face. Behind him, tucked safely in their hollow, Ayana and the children still slept, exhausted from their flight. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning silence. Owen's heart stopped. More shots followed, along with shouts and the thunder of hooves. He spun and scrambled back up the slope, lungs burning as he climbed. "Mama!" Ava's scream echoed off the canyon walls. Owen crested the ridge in time to see the marshal and his posse surrounding their hiding place. 6 men with rifles trained on Ayana, who stood with quiet dignity, shielding her children behind her. "Not a step closer, Owen," Marshal Harlan called out, his badge glinting in the early light. "She's under arrest for inciting violence and destruction of property." "That's a lie." Owen took a step forward, but froze when multiple rifles swung his way. "We were attacked. They burned my cabin." The marshal's face hardened. "Witnesses saw the fire start from inside. She turned violent when you harbored her, destroyed your property to cover her escape. The judge will hear it all." 2 deputies grabbed Ayana's arms while Ava clung to her mother's skirts, sobbing. The twins wailed in terror at the rough voices and strange men. "Owen!" Ayana called out, struggling to look back at him as they dragged her away. "Protect my children!" He started forward again, but the marshal's gun stopped him. "The children are county wards now. Step aside." While the posse's attention was on Owen, Ava managed to slip free. She darted into the brush, pulling her crying brothers with her. Owen silently thanked God for her quick thinking. "Find those kids," the marshal barked, but Owen moved to block their path. "You've got your prisoner," he growled. "The children are my responsibility now." The marshal studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his men. "Leave them. The mother's what we came for. The rest will sort itself out." Owen watched helplessly as they tied Ayana's hands and forced her onto a horse. Her back was straight, her head high, but he saw the fear in her eyes as she cast one last look toward where her children had vanished. As soon as the posse disappeared around the canyon bend, Owen rushed to find the children. Ava had led her brothers to a hollow log they'd noticed the day before, barely big enough to hide them. "Stay here," he told them, helping them crawl deeper into the log's shelter. "I'm going after your mama, but you have to stay hidden. Promise me." Ava nodded, tears streaming down her dirty face as she held her brothers close. "Don't let them hurt her," she whispered. Owen touched her cheek gently. "I'll come back for you soon. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." He ran to where he'd hidden his horse, pushing the animal hard as he followed the posse's dust trail back to town. By the time he reached the jailhouse, a crowd had already gathered. The marshal stood on the steps, announcing Ayana's crimes to the townsfolk. "She'll face the judge tomorrow morning," Harlan proclaimed. "Justice will be swift for those who turn to violence." Owen pushed through the muttering crowd to the jail's barred window. Ayana sat on her cot, hands folded in her lap, eyes closed in prayer. "I'll find a way," he promised quietly. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "My children?" "Safe, hidden." He gripped the iron bars. "This isn't justice. The syndicate burned my cabin, tried to kill us all." "The judge has already made up his mind," she said softly. "I saw it in his eyes when they brought me in. Pike's money speaks louder than truth." Owen's hands tightened on the bars until his knuckles went white. "I won't let them do this. Owen," her voice was gentle but firm, "do not throw your life away. My children need you now more than ever." He stayed until the marshal ordered him to leave, then walked numbly to the church. Preacher Josiah was waiting in his study, having heard the news. "They're going to convict her," Owen said, slumping into a chair. "Everything I've done, everyone I tried to protect, it's all falling apart." The preacher poured him a cup of coffee. "Justice often comes at a terrible price. The question is, are you willing to pay it?" "I don't know if I can." Owen's voice cracked. "I'm just one man. The syndicate, the marshal, the judge, they hold all the power." "No," the preacher's voice was firm. "They hold worldly power, but real strength comes from something deeper, from doing what's right, no matter the cost." A small sound made them turn. Ava stood in the doorway, her brothers clinging to her skirts. She must have followed Owen into town, refusing to stay hidden. "You bought us, mister," she said, her young voice trembling but determined. She crossed the room and took his hand in both of hers. "That means you're ours now." Owen stared at their joined hands, remembering that moment on the auction block that had started everything. Something shifted in his chest, like ice breaking up in spring. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I did." He gathered Ava close, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. The twins toddled over to join the embrace, not understanding everything but knowing they were safe in his arms. The preacher watched them with knowing eyes. Sometimes God's greatest gifts come disguised as our heaviest burdens. Owen held the children tighter, his resolve hardening like steel in a forge. Ava was right. He had bought them, made them his responsibility, and he would move heaven and earth to keep them together. As night settled over the town, he sat in the preacher's study making plans. The children slept on a pallet nearby, exhausted but safe for the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Owen was ready to face them. He wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Owen's horse stomped restlessly in the pre-dawn darkness as he checked his saddle straps one final time. The air felt heavy with coming rain, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Inside the preacher's house, lamplight glowed warm against the windows, where Ava watched over her sleeping brothers. "I have to try," Owen told Preacher Josiah, who stood on his porch with arms crossed. "Those county records might be our only chance to save Ayana." The preacher nodded gravely. "The county seat is 30 miles east. If you push hard, you can make it by midday." "Keep them safe," Owen said, glancing at the window where Ava's small face pressed against the glass. She raised one hand in farewell, and his heart clenched at the trust in her eyes. He swung into the saddle, and his horse broke into a steady lope as they headed east. The first rays of sun had barely touched the mountain peaks when they crossed the creek that marked the edge of town. Behind him, a church bell tolled 6 times, reminding him that Ayana's trial would begin at noon tomorrow. The miles stretched endlessly before him. His horse's hooves kicked up dust from the dry trail as morning heat began to build. By mid-morning, both rider and mount were lathered with sweat, but Owen refused to slow their pace. They passed scattered homesteads and grazing cattle, the landscape gradually flattening into prairie. Just before noon, the county seat's courthouse dome appeared on the horizon. The small city sprawled across the plains, its streets busy with wagons and riders. Owen's horse clattered down the main street, drawing curious stares from townsfolk unused to seeing such a trail-worn rider in such a hurry. He reined up hard at the county office, a red brick building with tall windows. Inside, clerks scratched at ledgers while dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. The head clerk peered at Owen over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Land records?" The man drawled. "3rd floor, west room. Mind you sign the register?" Owen took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots leaving muddy prints on the polished wood. The records room smelled of old paper and leather bindings. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with leather-bound volumes and loose papers. "I need deed registrations from the past 5 years," Owen told the ancient clerk, who dozed behind a desk. "Everything concerning Pike's syndicate and the railroad land grants." Hours passed as Owen pored over dusty volumes. His eyes burned from squinting at faded ink. Outside, thunder rumbled as the promised storm drew closer. Just when despair began to set in, he found it, a stack of deeds filed 6 months ago, all bearing the same signatures. Owen's hands shook as he compared the papers. 3 dead men's names appeared again and again, witnessing sales that had happened months after their deaths. He remembered the preacher mentioning a fever that had swept through last winter, taking several of the town's eldest residents. "Pike forged their signatures," he whispered, "used dead men's names to steal Ayana's land." He glanced around the empty room, heart pounding. The old clerk had shuffled away somewhere. Moving quickly, Owen folded the damning documents and stuffed them inside his shirt. He took the stairs at a dangerous pace, bursting out onto the street just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The storm broke in earnest as Owen mounted up. Lightning split the sky, and thunder boomed overhead as he pointed his tired horse westward. The road turned to mud beneath them, but he pushed on through sheets of rain that stung like needles. Darkness fell early under the storm clouds. Wolves began to howl in the hills, their cries carried on the wind. Owen's horse stumbled more frequently now, but he urged the faithful animal onward. The precious papers pressed against his chest felt like they were burning a hole through his shirt. Midnight found them still miles from town. Owen's clothes were soaked through, and his hands had gone numb on the reins. Lightning revealed glimpses of the trail ahead, then plunged them back into darkness. The wolves drew closer, their eyes glinting in the flashes of light. His horse's strength was failing. The animal's sides heaved with each labored breath as they splashed through muddy streams and struggled up slick hillsides. Owen whispered encouragement, promising rest ahead if they could just keep going. False dawn was breaking when they finally stumbled into town. The rain had stopped, leaving everything draped in heavy mist. Owen's horse barely made it to the preacher's hitching post before its legs began to buckle. He practically fell from the saddle, his own legs too stiff to hold him properly. The kitchen door burst open, spilling lamplight onto the wet ground. Ava ran out in her nightdress, helping him stagger inside where the preacher waited by a blazing hearth. "Uncle Owen!" she cried, using the name she'd begun calling him lately. "You're frozen through." The preacher helped Owen to a chair while Ava wrapped him in quilts. His fingers trembled so badly he could barely pull the papers from his shirt, but he managed to hand them to Josiah. "Dead men's names," he croaked through chattering teeth. "Pike. Forged everything. Used winter fever victims to witness fake sales." The preacher studied the documents, his eyes widening. "This is it," he breathed. "This could prove the whole syndicate's built on fraud. The circuit judge will have to acknowledge this." Owen tried to stand but found he couldn't. Ava pressed a cup of hot coffee into his shaking hands, while the twins, wakened by the commotion, toddled over to pat his legs with worried faces. "Rest now," the preacher said firmly. "You've done what needed doing. The judge won't start proceedings until 9 o'clock. We have time." Owen managed a weak nod before exhaustion claimed him. The last thing he felt was Ava tucking another quilt around his shoulders as he slipped into much-needed sleep. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Owen straightened his borrowed coat. His muscles still ached from the grueling ride, but determination pushed away his exhaustion. Beside him, Preacher Josiah clutched the precious documents in a leather folder while Ava held her brother's hands tightly. Townsfolk gathered in the square, their whispers rising like rustling leaves. Many had come to see justice served, though their ideas of justice differed sharply. Ranch hands lounged against hitching posts, their hands never far from their gun belts. Shop owners and farmers clustered in doorways, watching with wary eyes. "Proceedings are starting," the preacher murmured, nodding toward the courthouse doors where the marshal posted the notice. Owen knelt beside Ava. "Stay close to the preacher, no matter what happens." She nodded solemnly, hugging her brothers closer. "Yes, Uncle Owen." Inside, the courthouse hummed with tension. Morning light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced above the wooden benches. The judge, a grey-haired man with sharp eyes, sat behind his elevated desk, while clerks scratched at papers below. Ayanna sat quietly in the prisoner's box, her hands folded in her lap. Though her clothes were wrinkled from jail, she held herself with dignity. Her eyes met Owen's briefly, conveying silent gratitude. At the prosecution table, Randall Pike lounged with casual arrogance, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the working clothes around him. His lawyer shuffled papers importantly, while hired guns filled the back rows. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. The judge peered over his spectacles. "I understand new evidence has been brought forward in this case." "Yes, Your Honor." Preacher Josiah stepped forward, laying the folder on the judge's desk. "These documents reveal a pattern of fraud in recent land acquisitions." Pike's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! These papers were obtained without proper authority." "Were they stolen, Counselor?" The judge interrupted mildly. "Well, no, Your Honor, but then I'll examine them." The judge opened the folder, frowning as he studied the contents. Owen stood, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "Those deeds bear signatures of 3 men who died in last winter's fever outbreak. The dates show they supposedly witnessed land sales months after their deaths." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pike's face darkened as he whispered urgently to his lawyer. "These are serious allegations," the judge said, laying the papers aside. "Mr. Owen, please take the stand." Owen walked forward, feeling every eye upon him. After swearing his oath, he began his testimony. "I found those records yesterday in the county seat. They prove the syndicate forged documents to steal Ayanna's land and water rights. When I took in her children to protect them, Pike's men burned my cabin. They've used threats and violence to hide their fraud." More whispers filled the room. Owen saw several townspeople exchange troubled glances. "You're certain about the signatures?" the judge pressed. "Yes, sir. Preacher Josiah conducted the funeral services for those men himself." The judge turned to the preacher. "Is this true?" "It is, Your Honor." Josiah stepped forward. "I buried Thomas Wheeler, Samuel Gates, and Frederick Morton between December and January last. These deeds are dated March and April." The courtroom erupted in angry mutters. Pike's ranch hands shifted menacingly, but now the townsfolk were glaring at them instead of Ayanna. "Order!" the judge commanded, rapping his gavel. "In light of this evidence, I am postponing this trial pending a full investigation of these documents. The prisoner will remain in custody, but under house arrest in the preacher's care rather than the jail." "You can't do this!" Pike surged to his feet. "That water is vital to—" "To your profits, Mr. Pike?" The judge's voice cracked like ice. Sit down, or I'll have you removed. Pike subsided, but his face was thunderous. His hired guns began moving toward the front of the courtroom, hands dropping to their weapons. But something had changed in the room. Farmers and shopkeepers stood up, moving to block the gunmen's path. The blacksmith's massive form filled one aisle, while the general store owner and his sons secured another. "Don't think you want to start trouble here?" the blacksmith rumbled. The hired guns hesitated, looking to Pike for direction. He gave them a sharp gesture to stand down. Outside, the courthouse bell began to toll 9 o'clock, its clear notes floating across the square. Owen helped Ayanna step from the prisoner's box as Ava ran to embrace her mother. The twins squirmed in the preacher's arms, reaching for her. "Thank you," Ayanna whispered to Owen, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Townspeople approached to offer quiet words of support. The banker's wife pressed a loaf of fresh bread into Ayanna's hands, while the schoolteacher promised to send books for Ava. Pike and his men stormed out, their boots thundering on the courthouse steps. But their threats had lost their power. The truth had finally broken through, and hope spread across the square like the morning sunshine, touching every face with its warm light. "Come," Preacher Josiah said gently. "Let's get you settled at my house. There's much healing to be done." Owen followed the small family out into the square, watching as neighbors nodded respectfully or tipped their hats. The morning breeze carried away the last echoes of the bell, and with them, the shadow of fear that had hung over them all. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation as the circuit judge adjusted his spectacles. After 7 days of testimony, evidence, and deliberation, the moment of truth had arrived. Ayanna sat straight-backed in her chair, her quiet strength unwavering. "In light of the evidence presented," the judge's voice rang clear, "I find the defendant, Ayanna Wheeler, innocent of all charges. Furthermore, the syndicate's claim to her water rights is hereby nullified. The deed and water rights are restored to the Wheeler family in perpetuity." Joy exploded through the courtroom. Farmers clapped while their wives dabbed at tears. Ava buried her face in her mother's skirts, shoulders shaking with relief. The twins, not understanding but caught up in the excitement, bounced and giggled in her lap. Pike and his ranchers skulked toward the door, their faces dark with anger. But their power was broken. "Mr. Owen," the judge called out, "this court thanks you for your courage in bringing the truth to light." Preacher Josiah stood then, his voice carrying over the celebration. "Let this be a lesson to us all. We must repent our cruelty and stand together as neighbors should." That evening, in the warmth of the mission house dining hall, Owen watched Ava help her brothers with their soup. The family had found refuge here while planning their next steps. "Will they take us away again?" Ava asked softly. Owen shook his head firmly. "No, little one. You're safe now." As Preacher Josiah bowed his head to lead the blessing, Owen saw peace settle over their faces at last. They joined hands around the table, a family made whole again through justice and grace. Morning dew sparkled on charred timbers as Owen led his family up the mountain trail. The rising sun cast long shadows across what remained of his cabin. Ayanna touched a blackened post, her face serene despite the destruction. "The land remembers," she said softly. "It will welcome a new home." Ava and the twins played near the creek while Owen cleared debris. By mid-morning, Preacher Josiah arrived with his wagon. "The old mission grounds are yours until we rebuild," he announced. Town council approved it unanimous. Over the next weeks, the same townsfolk who had once turned away now appeared with offerings. Mr. Peterson brought fresh-cut lumber. The blacksmith donated nails. Women arrived with baskets of food for the workers. Even the marshal's deputy swung a hammer. Slowly, a new cabin rose from the ashes, larger than before. When Sunday evening arrived, they gathered around their own table for the first time. The lamp cast a warm glow as beans simmered on the cook stove. Laughter echoed off fresh-hewn walls as the twins chased each other. Ava slipped her small hand into Owen's calloused one. "We're safe now, Papa," she whispered. Tears welled in Owen's eyes as he bowed his head. Around him, his family joined hands in prayer, thanking God for second chances and the blessing of belonging. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.